Welcome to Percolating Change. Today I'm with Dr. Michelle McQuaid, the founder of Change Labs and is an award-winning researcher, LinkedIn top voice for mental health, and honorary fellow at Melbourne University's Centre of Wellbeing Science. Dr. Michelle translates cutting-edge research into practical strategies that help care for well-being, supercharge psychological safety, and co-create change in workplaces, schools, and communities. With 10 best-selling books and over 250 podcast interviews with leading researchers, Michelle's work regularly appears in Psychologically Today, Forbes, and media outlets across the world. Drawing from personal experience and scientific expertise, she creates playful, practical approaches to help people thrive, even during the most challenging of times. And today's topic I'm excited about is leading the heart of change. So it's my pleasure to welcome you, Dr. Michelle. Welcome.
Thanks, Alicia. It's lovely to be here with you and your listeners.
Thank you. Now, as is typical in our podcast sessions, we like to ask our guests for one sentence to set the table.
Yeah, we do research with workers all over the world, but in particular last year in Australia, we did a study with 1,000 Australian employees, all sorts of industries, all sorts of roles, leaders, team members. And what they told us was that 58% of workplace changes were being reported as unsuccessful in 2025. But there were 5 small evidence-based actions that leaders and teams were taking that made success more likely. And the good news, Alicia, was it didn't require more sophisticated project planning tools or even more emails or town halls for any of us.
Amazing. I love the sound of this. So, Michelle, who is this for and why now? If you can split that up into 2 responses, that would be lovely.
Yeah, so I think it's for anyone who's leading change. So whether you're in a formal leadership role or you're an informal change champion, I think as happens to many of us when we wind up on projects and in roles where there's a lot of change happening around us. The good news about these 5 evidence-based actions is they actually very rarely ever require permission or big budgets. They're actually part of how we approach change day to day and how we help support others through that. And the reason, Alicia, why now, why are they so important now for all of us, is that we are living through an unprecedented super cycle of change where climate challenges, economic challenges, political upheaval, social shifts and technological disruptions are colliding and amplifying each other in ways we've never seen before. So the World Economic Forum talks about this as a polycrisis, that we're facing these challenges on multiple fronts. What we found in our research is that for many of the workers, they see this land in their hip pocket around the cost of living crisis that we're hearing so much about in most countries. So what we need now are more human-centered ways of being able to navigate this pace and complexity of change without breaking under it.
Oh my goodness me, without breaking under it. So you said your research has found that in 1 to 2 workers they're quietly cracking. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so when we were doing this study in 2025 with the 1,000 Australian workers, we just started to see in the US this term that workers were quietly cracking in a couple of wellbeing studies in workplaces, but it hadn't quite defined what quiet cracking was. And I was curious, definitely at the start of 2025, we were noticing in workplaces that it looked like people's nervous systems were fraying. It was sort of like people's resilience skills were no longer doing the job. And I really think it's because this super cycle of change, the pace and complexity was just not things that those tools were built for. And so we got curious, we went out, we asked workers, are you quietly cracking? And 1 in 2 workers said, yeah, I'm really trying to hold it all together on the outside while I'm hiding the fact that inside I'm falling apart. And what we found, Alicia, was this was different from burnout. It was almost like a precursor to burnout, where these workers who were quietly cracking then were 6 times more likely to wind up burnt out. And so, Alicia, I'm sure as many of your listeners have wondered, we said to them, well, why? What's the cause of this? What's going on? And 2/3 of them put it down to world-related factors, was what we described them. Things like the cost of living crisis, for example, fears that they were going to lose their jobs. And then 1/3 was related to work factors, and the most frequently experienced psychosocial, that emotional and social risks that in Australia we now have legislation requiring us as workplaces to measure and do everything reasonably possible to minimise, was poor change management.
Oh my goodness me, that's concerning deeply. But how can we lower this risk? What's your views on that? Because poor change management is something I read about constantly, and as a change manager, you don't want to be put into that box. So how can we lower that risk of poor change management? And
we did what the data nerd in me, Alicia, loves to do, which is to ask people. We were like, okay, we've got this quiet cracking going on. We've got people saying that poor change management is burning them out at work. And we've got, reports that change is not as successful as any of us would like us to see it being. So what is going on? And when you ask these questions in research, sometimes you just get a whole lot of nothing back. It's like, really, there's just too much. There's nothing obvious or clear yet in the mix that would help us. But what we found consistently was that these 5 factors kept emerging around each of those challenges. How successful can we make change? Can we lower that risk of poor change management? And can we lower the chance of people quietly cracking? And so these 5 factors, we call it the heart of change framework, mostly because, as we'll see in a second, they're all emotional and social elements of change. They're the more human-centered side of change. It's not that we don't have great change project management plans. It's not that we don't have a ton of communication, although people often will say it's communication that's the issue. We found that it's not so much communication, but the way we're communicating and connecting around the human side of change. So HEART stands for, the H is for honouring feelings, what's actually going on, because change is an emotional experience. We all know that. The E is for engaging purposefully. How do we get commitment, not just compliance? How do we, appreciate people's strengths through there, the things they're good at and enjoy doing, and draw on those to navigate change? The R is reaching out for help. Are we asking for help and support during it? And the T is taking tiny steps forward together. And, lots of wonderful research around the idea that as much as we like to write big change plans, many of them are out of date within weeks of us putting them down, because we live in a context that's constantly shifting and isn't as predictable as we would like it to be. So the data found that teams that were implementing those heart factors often in the ways that they were working together were more likely to have a 69% change success rate versus 47% when those things weren't present. And they were likely to experience 24% less reports of poor change management and 13% fewer people quietly cracking.
I love that. The heart of the change, and those 5 different layers that you can really make sure that you're honing in on, to make sure that you don't miss out on how we communicate with people in the right context, and really listening to understand. I do love that. So this is a framework, if you will, that your Change Labs has developed.
That's right. I have a PhD in systems change and a master's in studying positive psychology, so that's science of human thriving. And I'd been doing that kind of work for more than 15 years in all sorts of organisations, all sorts of locations, all sorts of change challenges. And there is a wealth of other evidence-based studies that would reinforce these factors are worth us investing in, both as formal or informal change leaders. But when it comes to navigating change, because it is often complex and dynamic and subjective in terms of each person's experience of the change, it can
Very
be
much.
really hard to give leaders a practical toolkit of what to do with all of that, particularly when we've got leaders who often have experienced very command and control traditional approaches to change, and they're very attached to their change management plans, this delusion and illusion that they can control the change that's about to happen. And then when they find themselves in the midst of what we all do, which is to self-organize, that's what human beings are wired for and how we live in community together, it can be very overwhelming for many of us as leaders to go, well, what am I meant to do with that then? How am I meant to be responsible for delivering the outcomes? So what we've been doing is finding that this heart change framework can be a really practical, easy way for leaders to start to understand that emotional and social, the human part of the change, and then to break it open for them to go, okay, well, if we've got a H, honor all the feelings, how do we make it safe enough to start talking about the emotional experience of change, to know not everyone's going to be excited about it, and that's not necessarily a problem. In fact, sometimes the fears, the uncertainty and doubt are really healthy. Those are good things we need to be listening to. It's important data for us as leaders. So how do we make it okay to talk about all the feelings around the change? One of our clients we work with, who's a HR leader, says to her teams now, all feelings are welcome, not all behaviours are. And I love this as a way to differentiate that, okay, to talk about the feelings, it's not a free ticket to just behave badly.
Exactly. No, I love that.
In the E for engage purposefully, again, how do we turn announcements, more one-way communication that's often going on with change, into more conversations? And how do we let people be honest about what they care enough to own? What are they actually intrinsically motivated around this change to do? And leaders are often, I find, scared about this. They're like, but Michelle, what if they don't want to own the thing we need them to do? And I always say, isn't it better to know that at the outset than 6 months into the change when you're wondering why nothing's happening? Well, they never cared enough about it in the first place. So to me, it's better to have those conversations to figure out, have we got people that care enough about this change to execute it? And if we don't, what are the conversations we need to be having to get there? The A, appreciate strengths. We all have things that we're good at and enjoy doing. How do we bring that to the change? A third of us have no idea what those strengths are. So even just having that conversation is useful. The reaching out for help, again, often we're terrified during change to ask for help because we're worried it'll make us look like we're incompetent, that we're bothering people, that we don't know how to do things. So, but reaching out for help is normally the one thing that stands between us and success, studies find. So how do we create these helping cultures for each other? And then the taking tiny steps, how do we teach and encourage people to sense and learn and adapt as a change unfolds, to give them permission to keep doing the pivot, rather than going, well, it had to look like this and we've got to follow every step, even though our context now is completely different. So we take tiny steps. I think it's important that we've got a North Star. This is where we're trying to get to, the change we're trying to realise, but we hold the how we get there with a little more flexibility and adaptability so that we're not then stuck executing something that now no longer makes sense, or going about it in a far harder way than it needs to be done.
I love the clarity around how you've explained this. And when we talk about how people can get hold of your tools at the end, I'm definitely going to be the first one from this session to go and have a look, because it just brings you back to the drawing board. And it's not, you can't just dust off that change plan and force it into existence. And, and things change. And you have to be flexible all the time. I mean, the weather. I mean, they might say it's going to rain and thunderstorm, and nothing happens. It's 80 degrees. So I mean, it's all. You have to be adaptable. I love this, and I know that our listeners and viewers are going to enjoy this particular conversation. Now we're coming to the end, but what is one thing do I want to ask you that question, or do I want to ask you? Yes, I do. I want to ask that question. What is one thing that you do differently next time, if you could, if there was a situation in which even before the heart became, a good a framework as it is, and you're implementing it daily?
Yeah, well, before my studies, I led large change projects all over the world for PricewaterhouseCoopers. So, leading change in 60 different countries around living our values and bringing our brand to life in all sorts of scenarios. And like any change leader, I had a very clear set of outcomes that we were measuring the effectiveness of our change investments and efforts against. And while outcomes, of course, absolutely matter in commercial and non commercial settings, I think what I would do differently now is alongside those outcomes, have some very clear learning goals, not just performance goals. And those learning goals would be around how we are building people's capacity and capability for change. The challenge about this super cycle of change we now find ourselves in the world is we're really only just at the beginning. And the next decade, for better or worse, is not going to be less change, slower change, not as complex change. The intensity of that super cycle is really only going to continue to gather pace as those different factors continue to impact each other. So we need a level of capability for change that most of us don't have right now. And so really, yes, is this immediate change successful or not? Of course matters. But I would say almost more importantly, those learning goals of how we're building our capability for change going forward as well.
I love that. I love that. So absolutely makes 100% sense to me. And in the same context, maybe the last minute or so, what's one challenge do you think that we need to be mindful of or to watch within the next 6 to 12 months? Could be related to what we just talked about or not.
Well, I think one of the biggest changes we're all seeing both at work, one of the biggest changes we're all seeing both at work and outside of work is the introduction of AI tools into our world. One of the other things we did in that research was to ask people, how are you going with the use of AI tools? How is it impacting change? How is it impacting performance? How is it impacting our emotional and social ways of working with each other? And we found some really important things. The good piece of news in all of that is absolutely the more time people were spending using AI tools, we did see performance improvements. It actually does a bit of a U curve. I think we're all experiencing some of that steep learning curve that comes with the use of AI tools. But the more we're playing with them, yes, we are seeing performance outcomes. And the other important piece to be aware is that unfortunately, even if we're only sometimes, and certainly we're often playing with them, we were seeing some impacts we need to stay mindful of. One of those impacts was on well-being. So people's well-being, the more they're using AI tools, is actually declining and staying down. It doesn't recover as performance improves. And I think about, the use of our strengths, those things we're good at and enjoy doing, and whether the use of AI tools is taking that away from us. I think about myself. I love writing. The AI tools, when I use them to write, I'm not doing as much of that writing. I'm doing more editing and curating of content. It's not the same. It doesn't light my brain up and give me a sense of joy and fulfillment in the same way. The other thing, though, we saw was that civility in workplaces was also declining. And again, only as soon as we start using AI tools sometimes, it continues as often. And again, I think we can't afford to lose civility in workplaces. It's so important to the relationships, to the trust, to that sense of belonging and cohesion, to having good ideas to be able to collaborate and work together on. And so I think these are two elements we need to stay mindful of as we introduce AI tools, which is probably one of the biggest changes we're seeing in most workplaces presently.
Yeah, absolutely. So the civility in the workplace has increased. The lack of civility has gone down.
Sorry.
And that is...
So the presence of civility has decreased. Yep.
Yes.
So we're getting ruder with each other. We're less respectful with each other is what that data
Why? Why is that?
Yeah, so we interrogated that as well after we found this finding, both in our research and what other people were finding as well. And I think the easiest way at the end of the day is to think about our own lived experience of using these tools. One of the things when we pull these research papers together is in the past I have a small team, we'd all come together, we'd look at the data, we'd have conversations about ideas and the findings, we'd start to shape kind of the insights and the practicalities for people. And And those moments create important memories, bonds of trust, an interconnection of ideas that you don't get except when you're in conversation with each other. This time when I did the report, I tried to use the AI tools. So when I first got the data, I worked with the AI tools as I went through it all, thinking with the AI tool, like, what might this mean and how do we tell this story and connect it? And then I gave the draft of the report to my team to review. But it took so much away, Alicia, from that process that we've had in previous years of the memory and the co-creation and the trust building and the diversity of thinking, a different sense of ownership on the data as well. And so as more of us turn to do work we once did together individually now just with the AI tool, I do think it's lowering our opportunities for connection, for respectful engagement, for valuing each other. It's taking those moments away from us, I think, is one of the components, certainly.
And yeah, that's so much there to unpack. Even on LinkedIn, sometimes the civility I've noticed has deteriorated. And I'm thinking, it's a shame we can't just couch that differently so that the tone comes out differently and it doesn't offend, even though one might not mean to offend. So,
I think there's that element of removal of the human, of each other, right? When we're in conversation, we know each other. We tend not to be rude to each other because you're a human being. Just like I'm a human being. We get some things right, we get some things wrong. We're open to changes. But the more that we work with an AI tool and the less we work with human beings, the easier it is to take the humanness out of the way that we're treating each other.
The clarity around how you explain that is second to none. Thank you so much, Michelle. I know we're running out of time, but can I just quickly ask you about a myth that you might like to bust? I love asking these questions to my guests, and I just don't want to let you go yet.
I think it's a great question to be asking all of us. When we ask people, why is poor change management such an issue in your workplace? The most common thing we hear is communication. It's an issue of communication. And when we try to unpack that, employees tell us, well, leaders aren't passing messages on in a timely way that we can contribute to. Leaders tell us that employees aren't showing up or listening or contributing when they do ask. And they're also telling us that the organisation isn't giving them things in a timely way that they can pass it on. And then the organisational leaders will say leaders aren't passing things on, and people, so there's a lot of finger pointing in every direction somewhere else, Alicia. The one thing they all agree on, though, when we ask is, well, do you need more emails and town halls and communication to fix that? Nobody needs any more of that. So what we often hear is it's a communication issue when it comes to poor change management. When we scratch under the surface behind that myth, is actually what we're craving is better connection, more meaningful conversations with each other that allow us that chance to honour the emotions, to find what matters to us that we want to own, to tap into our strengths, to ask each other for help and to figure the tiny steps forward.
Thank you so much, Michelle. This has been amazing having you on and unpacking just wonderful words, wisdom and the gems around organisational change management and how we can better improve and work with using that your heart framework to connect better with people and to, it's like a landing, what I call it doesn't matter where you come into the change, you can look at where you're at in that framework, that heart framework, and decide what you need to touch into. So thank you so much. Before I let you go, how can people get hold of you? I know you have got a busy practice, you're extremely busy. I'm going to post in the show notes, your links to your website, etc. Is there anything else you'd like to add in terms of how people can get hold of you?
Yeah, so if you visit the Change Labs with an S on the end.com, you'll find all of our work. And we do have the full report is up on the site. You can download that for free. We have some podcasts on heart that dive deeper into each of those factors and digital tools, posters and toolboxes. There is a certification that's self-paced that you can go through if you're wanting to play with more. And Alicia, just as you were saying, we have clients that use it at the start of change planning, but also in the midst of it to go, okay, what's working and not here. There's a little free survey tool that you can use as well to see how are we doing on those factors, which one might we prioritise. So plenty there to play with.
Yes, that's where my mind went to, yes, it's perfect to have that at the start, beautiful, but what happens if you're parachuted in halfway through a program of work? Where are we,
And especially for change that's years in the making, right? It's like, again, I think about the adapt as changes unfolding over time.
Absolutely. So thank you so much. And to our listeners, I hope you've had as much fun as I have. If you've liked today's session, please like and subscribe and look out for other short episodes coming up. Thank you so much, Dr. Michelle.
Thanks, Alicia.